Welcome to the FeelAndNote Library Tour. Today's guest is Alexander the Great.
He who conquers his fear shall conquer the world itself.
Alexander III of Macedon, known as Alexander the Great, was king of the ancient Macedonian Empire and the most formidable conqueror in recorded history. Ascending the throne at 20, he forged a vast empire stretching from Greece to India, and his spread of Hellenistic culture left an indelible mark on civilization.
I am Alexander, king of Macedon. The Iliad awakened the spirit of the hero within me, and the wisdom of history gave me the blade to pierce the heart of empires. On blood-soaked battlefields, I recited tragedy, and before poets I sheathed my sword. Through the endless exhaustion of campaign, literature was the supply line of my soul.
The Iliad, Homer, 8th century BC. Summary.
An epic poem by Homer from the 8th century BC. It chronicles the final year of the 10-year war between the Greek coalition and Troy. When the greatest warrior, Achilles, withdraws from battle after a feud with commander Agamemnon, the death of his companion Patroclus drives him back to the field in a storm of rage and grief. It is the wellspring of Western literature, a song of war's glory and tragedy, of honor and fate.
Context. Alexander the Great slept with a copy of the Iliad, personally annotated by his tutor Aristotle, tucked beneath his pillow alongside a dagger. He called it a treasury of all military virtue. After launching his Persian campaign, his first detour was to Troy, where he laid a wreath at the tomb of Achilles.
Achilles was truly blessed. In life he had a loyal companion, and in death he found a great poet to sing of his deeds.
After conquering Persia, Alexander stored this manuscript in a jeweled casket seized from Darius III. He chose the Iliad as the one treasure worthy of the most precious chest in the world. Anabasis, Xenophon, c. 370 BC. Summary.
A first-hand account of 10,000 Greek mercenaries who joined the rebellion of Cyrus the Younger in 401 BC. After marching deep into Persia and losing their commanders to treachery, they fought their way back through hostile territory. Written by Xenophon himself, it is rich in tactical detail, terrain, logistics, and battlefield strategy.
Context. This book served as Alexander's practical military guide for his Persian campaign. No Macedonian had ever penetrated so deep into Asia. Only Xenophon had mapped the route. Alexander studied Mesopotamian geography, Persian military tactics, and logistics in hostile territory from these very pages. Cyropaedia, Xenophon, c. 370 BC. Summary.
Written by Xenophon, this work chronicles the life of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire. More political philosophy than strict history, it projects the virtues of an ideal ruler onto the figure of Cyrus, his valor in battle, his wisdom in governance, his generosity toward soldiers, and his firmness against enemies.
Context. Alexander read this book from childhood and deeply admired Cyrus the Great. That admiration revealed itself after his conquest of Persia, when Alexander visited the tomb of Cyrus at Pasargadae and discovered that guards had desecrated the burial chamber. He ordered their immediate execution and commanded the tomb's full restoration. Ancient Greek lyric poetry, Pindar et al., 5th century BC. Summary.
An anthology of ancient Greek lyric poets, including Pindar's victory odes, Sappho's love poems, and Alcaeus's war songs. Pindar's odes, composed for Olympic champions, are choral hymns celebrating heroic ideals, the pinnacle of classical Greek literature.
Context. In 335 BC, when Alexander crushed the Theban revolt and razed the city, he gave a single order of preservation: spare the temples, the house of Pindar, and his descendants. Pindar had once written odes praising Alexander's ancestors. He burned a city to the ground, yet spared a poet's home.
The Odyssey, Homer, 8th century BC.
Summary.
The sequel to the Iliad. After the fall of Troy, the cunning hero Odysseus embarks on a decade-long voyage home to Ithaca. From the cave of the Cyclops to the song of the Sirens and a descent into the underworld, this mythic Odyssey celebrates human wisdom, endurance, and the meaning of homecoming.
Context. When Alexander set out to found a new city in Egypt, legend holds that Homer appeared to him in a dream and recited a passage from the Odyssey, inspiring him to choose the site of Alexandria. Alexander praised Homer's poetry for guiding him to the perfect location for his city.
Homer's verse led me to the perfect site for my city.
Even after founding Alexandria, Alexander never stopped. He pressed on beyond Persia all the way to India, driven ever forward without rest. Finally, in 326 BC, his exhausted soldiers pleaded to turn back at the Hyphasis River, and Alexander, who had held out to the last, reluctantly ordered the retreat. Unlike Odysseus, who staked his life on returning home to Ithaca, Alexander's Ithaca was never Macedon. The destination he truly sought may have been the unreachable edge of the world itself. The Tragedies of Aeschylus, Aeschylus, 472 BC. Summary.
Before he was a playwright, Aeschylus was a proud warrior who fought against the Persian host at Marathon. Among his vast body of work, The Persians depicts the devastation of an empire's defeat, while Prometheus Bound portrays eternal punishment for defying the gods. These plays stand as the most magnificent warnings of how human hubris summons destruction.
Context. Even in the campaign tents of the Eastern expedition, Alexander read the Tragedies of Aeschylus that he had brought from home. To him, tragedy was not mere literature, but a mirror reflecting his own fate. In 330 BC, he set fire to the palace of Persepolis, as if punishing the hubris of Xerxes, who had burned the temples of Athens 150 years before. He had reenacted the very destruction that the Persians had warned against, directly upon the enemy's heart. Yet at that moment, the spark of hubris leapt to Alexander himself, and the undefeated conqueror may have become the protagonist on tragedy's own stage. It was around this time that he began to call himself a god. The Tragedies of Sophocles, Sophocles, 5th century BC. Summary.
Sophocles captured the pitch-dark interior of imperfect humanity, beyond the providence of the gods. Oedipus Rex, who refuses to retreat even before the truth, and falls magnificently. Ajax, the mightiest warrior who loses his honor to a moment of madness and takes his own life. These tragedies are lonely portraits of human beings locked in bloody struggle against merciless fate, in utter isolation.
Context. Alexander, already on Tragedies' stage, was dragged into an even deeper abyss in the autumn of 328 BC at a banquet in Mariconda. Drunk and out of his senses, he seized a spear and killed Cletus, a comrade who had provoked him. This was the very man who had saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus, and Alexander had torn his savior apart with his own hands. Immediately after, he turned the same spear on himself, and his bodybirds barely restrained him. It was a moment when Ajax's tragedy, the warrior who takes his own life after a fit of madness, nearly replayed itself in reality. But the bloodstain of the slaughter would not fade, and his inner isolation only deepened. The following year, Alexander imposed the Persian custom of prostration, and when Callisthenes defied him to the end, Alexander had him executed without mercy. That execution was Antigone's steadfast resistance against power, reenacted as a real-world bloodbath. In the end, the conqueror who held the world beneath his feet was shattering into the most terrible and wretched of monsters at the very center of his vast empire. The Tragedies of Euripides, 5th century BC. Summary.
The works of Euripides, celebrated for his penetrating psychological insight and vivid portrayal of women, Medea, the Bacchae, and other plays reinterpret traditional myths through a profoundly human lens. He was the most popular tragedian of Alexander's era.
Context. Euripides spent his final years at the Macedonian court, making him a poet who carried the scent of Alexander's homeland. For Alexander, tragedy was woven into the very fabric of life. But in 324 BC, Hephaestion, the other half of his soul, succumbed to fever, and this tragedy struck Alexander with a blow from which he would never recover. For 3 days and nights, the king lay over the body and wept, then executed the physicians who had failed to save his companion, losing the last remnants of his reason. Just 8 months later, beneath the scorching sun of Babylon in what is now Iraq, the young conqueror, only 32, and never to return to his homeland, crumbled to dust. In later ages, one story was passed down, said to have been told during his lifetime.
When you bury me, let my hands hang outside the coffin, so the world may see that even Alexander, who held the whole earth in his grasp, leaves with nothing.
The brief, blazing lives of heroes and the helplessness of mortals that tragedy laid bare, Alexander embodied all of it and exited the stage of history in just this way. But this was not the end. The library he carried eastward on horseback set in motion the great tide called Hellenism, as Greek philosophy, literature, and science mingled with the civilizations of Egypt, Persia, and India. Human knowledge and art leapt to an entirely new plane. The life and epic of Alexander the Great live on, reaching us still 2,400 years later. Those were the 8 books that accompanied Alexander the Great across his battlefields. Curious about the deeper story of the conqueror who wielded a sword in one hand and a book in the other 24 centuries ago? Discover more on FeelAndNote.